They thought I would lose control, but I didn't flinch. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter, unopened, sunlight slicing through the blinds and casting lines across the wooden floor. I had spent the morning arranging my grandmother's china, polishing each plate until it caught the light, while Olivia and Ethan were oblivious in their own worlds, assuming I wouldn't notice the subtle manipulations hidden in plain sight. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the aroma sharp and grounding, and let my hands linger over the smooth surface of the cup. Nothing felt normal anymore, the silence in the house heavy and almost accusatory. The messages I had glimpsed on my phone the night before replayed in my mind, each carefully worded sentence, a veiled assertion of control. Ethan had been distracted, nodding along to Olivia's suggestions without meeting my eyes, while Olivia smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes, a mask polished from years of practice. I set the coffee down and traced my fingers along the edge of the table, remembering how many times I had prepared dinners for this family, watched them laugh, and thought myself invisible in their routines. Today was different. I wasn't invisible. I felt each heartbeat, each subtle shift in the air, as if it were a drum marking my presence. The mail had arrived, and I retrieved a stack of letters, letting my gaze linger on the return addresses, each one a clue. I opened them slowly, deliberately, unfolding the crisp paper, the ink familiar and precise. There it was, a note buried beneath routine bills and advertisements, a slip of paper containing a date, a meeting, an instruction that Olivia assumed I would overlook. I breathed in, letting the words sink without a flinch, my voice still calm, lower than it had been in years, steady, carrying the weight of someone who had witnessed decades of subtle deceptions. The sun moved across the kitchen floor, elongating shadows, yet I didn't move. I sat, observing, absorbing, cataloging, my eyes catching every tremor in Olivia's hand as she placed a coffee mug down in the living room, her subtle hesitation betraying her practiced ease. Ethan glanced at me, his brow furrowed for a moment before he quickly masked it with a distracted smile. I stood slowly, not with anger, not with hasty steps, but with measured, deliberate movements that left no room for misinterpretation. I took the note from the envelope, unfolded it fully, and laid it flat on the counter where anyone could see. The paper's presence alone shifted the atmosphere, and I noticed Olivia's gaze flicker, the briefest flash of unease that passed across her features before she forced her usual composure. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Every detail, from the placement of the cups to the angle of the sunlight, worked silently on my behalf. This morning, I realized the power of patience, of quiet observation, and the strength hidden in measured silence. I had used yesterday. Ethan and Olivia had left the kitchen moments ago, their footsteps fading down the hallway, leaving behind an echo of hurried politeness that did not reach the corners of the room where observation had its own quiet rules. I walked to the window and watched the light shift across the driveway, noticing how the shadows of the trees fell like stripes on the concrete, each line a silent reminder of the passage of time and the patience required to perceive subtle changes. The envelope from yesterday rested on the counter, still unopened, a silent witness to what I had discovered, and I allowed my eyes to linger on it without reaching for it yet, letting anticipation build into a calm, deliberate awareness. I opened a cabinet and pulled out a set of measuring cups, arranging them with precision, enjoying the simple act of aligning them from largest to smallest, each one fitting snugly into the next. I prepared a pot of tea, the steam curling in the morning air, carrying with it a quiet sense of ritual and control. Every sound was amplified in the silence. The faint tick of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional rustle of leaves outside. I poured the tea, my hands steady, and set it on the table, listening as the cup made contact with the wood, a small but deliberate acknowledgement of presence and routine. The house felt different now, alive with attention that had nothing to do with noise or commotion, but with awareness and intent. I recalled minor interactions from the previous evening, the way Olivia had shifted her gaze when I entered the room, the subtle tightening of her shoulders, Ethan's fleeting hesitation before speaking, all of which I cataloged silently in my mind. I moved toward the note again, finally taking it in my hands, feeling the texture of the paper beneath my fingers, the weight of its contents pressing lightly, but insistently against my perception. I unfolded it with care, noting the neat handwriting, the carefully chosen words, the hidden implications embedded in a casual tone, and I allowed a slow breath to escape, my chest rising and falling with the deliberate rhythm of calm observation. Every action taken by Olivia and Ethan, every glance, every carefully chosen word, was now under scrutiny, catalogued not with judgment, but with awareness. Preparation for what would come next. I sat at the kitchen table, tea in hand, the morning light illuminating the contours of the envelope and the subtle changes in the room that marked the start of another day. I did not speak, I did not react outwardly, and yet the room felt charged, alive with the quiet knowledge that I was neither blind nor passive. I felt a patience in myself that had been cultivated over decades, a steady, measured readiness to act, tempered by observation and thought, knowing that every step taken in silence could carry the weight of consequence. As I looked around, noticing the faint dust on a windowsill, the subtle crease in the tablecloth, the sunlight catching on the edge of a picture frame, I realized that these small details, often overlooked, were now part of a larger awareness, a quiet control that no one could see but that governed everything within this space. I sipped the tea, letting its warmth settle into my hands and chest, each moment reinforcing a calm, deliberate strategy, a readiness to respond at the precise moment, neither rushed nor reactive, but measured and deliberate, a silent assertion of presence and vigilance in the stillness of the morning. The afternoon sun shifted across the living room, slanting through the blinds and creating long, thin rectangles of light that stretched across the floor, and I sat quietly on the edge of the sofa, a notebook in my lap, pen poised but still. Each movement in the house carried significance now, the faint click of a mug being set down, the soft hum of the air conditioner, even the distant sound of a car passing on the street outside, all woven into a tapestry of observation that allowed me to understand the undercurrents without a single word spoken. I recalled the small inconsistencies from earlier, the way Olivia had lingered in the kitchen just a moment too long, her eyes darting away when I looked up, Ethan nodding as if in agreement, while his expression betrayed uncertainty. I made a note in my notebook, a simple record of the time, the subtle gesture, the tone of voice, each detail a piece of the puzzle that had been hidden in plain sight for too long. I rose slowly, letting my movement carry the weight of someone accustomed to patience, and walked over to the window, watching the branches sway gently in the wind, the sunlight catching on the glass panes and reflecting patterns on the wall. I considered my next steps carefully, understanding that the balance of perception was everything, that even a seemingly small reaction could reveal more than I intended. I brewed another cup of tea, letting the steam rise and fill the room with its soft, familiar aroma, a grounding ritual that reminded me of order and continuity amidst the subtle chaos. Every object in the room, the polished table, the lined-up cups, the framed photographs on the mantel, spoke to the life I had built and maintained, each item a testament to care, history, and presence, and I allowed myself a brief moment to acknowledge that these details were now my allies, silent witnesses to the unfolding drama. As I sipped the tea, I reflected on conversations past, words that had been said and unsaid, the pauses that carried weight, the fleeting expressions that revealed intentions, cataloging them all in a mental ledger of awareness. I moved through the house deliberately, checking the arrangement of cushions, the angle of the blinds, the position of the papers on the counter, each action precise, unhurried, a demonstration of presence without confrontation. The shadows lengthened across the floor as the day wore on, and I felt the subtle tension in the air, a quiet acknowledgement from both Olivia and Ethan, though they might not have realized it, that their careful manipulations were now being observed with clarity and patience. I sat again, letting the tea cool, pen resting on the open notebook, and allowed a calmness to settle over me, the kind that comes from awareness, control, and the certainty that every detail had been noted, every movement understood, and that the unfolding of events would proceed with me fully attentive, quietly orchestrating the next steps in a measured, deliberate way that required no haste, no anger, only observation and readiness. The sunlight waned, casting a warm amber glow across the kitchen floor, and I moved with deliberate care, opening drawers, aligning utensils, and adjusting the placemats until everything appeared precisely in order. I recalled conversations from the past weeks, the subtle inflections in Olivia's voice when she suggested changes to routines, Ethan's fleeting hesitations that betrayed uncertainty, and I cataloged each with the clarity that comes from patience and careful observation. The house remained quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock and the occasional hum of the refrigerator, ordinary sounds that now carried weight because I was attuned to them, listening for shifts, inconsistencies, and patterns. I poured myself another cup of tea, the warmth filling my hands, and let the steam rise, carrying a calming rhythm that contrasted with the tension I sensed lingering in the corners. I walked to the living room and observed the arrangement of the furniture, noting the angles of cushions, the slight tilt of a photo frame, and even the placement of coasters, each detail a subtle marker of the household dynamics that Olivia and Ethan believed were unnoticed. I sat down, pen in hand, and wrote brief notes in my notebook, recording the time, actions, and tone of the morning so far, a quiet ledger of awareness that no one could see but that guided every next step I planned to take. Shadows stretched across the room as the day progressed, and I allowed myself to feel the weight of presence, not with urgency, but with the deliberate understanding that control does not require movement, only attentiveness and strategy. I recalled previous afternoons when small, almost imperceptible gestures had spoken volumes. The way Olivia would glance quickly at Ethan before answering, the brief hesitations before she responded to inquiries, and I smiled slightly to myself, knowing these patterns would serve as indicators when the time to act arrived. I sipped the tea slowly, appreciating its warmth and consistency, a grounding anchor amidst the subtle calculations of the household, and I considered the way each word, each glance, and each object could be interpreted and leveraged to maintain clarity and oversight. As I set the cup down, I adjusted the notebook and pen to be within reach, ensuring that no detail went unnoticed, no nuance unrecorded, and no behavior left unexamined. I felt the quiet empowerment that comes from deliberate observation, the strength and patience, and the knowledge that the unfolding moments were entirely visible to me, even if they remained hidden from those around me. The soft shift of light across the walls reminded me that time itself was on my side, that each passing hour allowed for further understanding and for the subtle, precise shaping of what was to come, and in that space, I found calm, focus, and the quiet assertion of control that required no announcement, only awareness and preparedness. The afternoon light softened, spilling through the tall windows and casting a gentle glow across the polished hardwood floors, and I moved deliberately through the house, noting the subtle changes from earlier in the day. I opened a drawer to straighten the silverware, the familiar clink of metal against metal grounding me in routine and focus. Every sound, from the distant hum of a car on the street to the faint whisper of wind through the trees, was registered with careful attention, a silent ledger of observation. Olivia and Ethan passed through the kitchen briefly, their movements practiced and measured, yet I noted every hesitation, every glance diverted, cataloging each in the quiet of my mind. I retrieved a small stack of papers from the countertop, arranging them neatly, checking the alignment and spacing as if this simple act could reinforce the order I was establishing in the room and, symbolically, in the household dynamics. I poured another cup of tea, the warmth seeping into my hands, and I allowed myself a moment to breathe, inhaling deeply, the aroma sharp yet calming, reinforcing the deliberate rhythm of the morning. Sitting at the table, I picked up my pen and began making notes, not hurriedly, not in anger, but with measured patience, documenting observations, a slight shift in Olivia's posture, the way Ethan avoided direct eye contact, the cadence of their conversation, each detail a clue to understanding intent without confrontation. The light moved across the table, touching the edges of the envelope from earlier, and I let it sit there, its presence a quiet assertion of awareness, a reminder of the small but critical facts that required attention. I observed the subtle adjustments Olivia made to her surroundings, the careful positioning of her belongings, each movement suggesting awareness, yet under the scrutiny of careful observation, revealing inadvertent truths. I moved through the living room, adjusting the position of cushions, smoothing a throw, aligning objects in the light, every action deliberate, a quiet assertion of presence, and a reflection of the awareness cultivated over decades. The day continued, shadows lengthening, sunlight shifting, and I remained observant, seated at the intersection of routine and insight, patient and measured, knowing that each small detail would inform the next step, every movement a prelude to understanding, every pause an exercise in deliberate calm, each moment reinforcing the steady, quiet control that defined my presence within the household and set the stage for the subtle orchestration to follow. The late afternoon settled over the house with a quiet intensity, sunlight dimming as it passed through the blinds, casting elongated shadows that stretched across the floorboards and the furniture arranged meticulously as if awaiting inspection. I moved deliberately from room to room, noting the alignment of cushions, the position of coasters, and the slight tilt of picture frames, each detail carrying its own significance in the subtle language of observation. Ethan and Olivia were in the living room, speaking softly, their tones measured, but I observed the fleeting hesitation in their gestures, the way Olivia's hand lingered over a cup, the slight narrowing of Ethan's eyes, and I catalogued every small indication with precision. I returned to the kitchen, retrieved my notebook, and began making careful entries, each observation noted without commentary, merely a record of patterns and intentions that had long gone unnoticed. I prepared another cup of tea, the steam curling upward in a gentle spiral, and placed it near the notebook, the warmth grounding me in a familiar rhythm as I watched Olivia arrange the magazines on the coffee table, straightening edges, aligning spines with almost imperceptible care, a reflection of the calculated attention she assumed would go unseen. I walked to the window and observed the changing light, the shadows shifting across the room, and I allowed myself to reflect on the consistency of behaviors, the small gestures and expressions that conveyed more than words ever could, understanding now that patience and attention could reveal the truth without confrontation. Each detail, from the slight tremor in Olivia's voice when she answered a question to the way Ethan's gaze momentarily faltered before returning to its casual neutrality, was a piece of the larger picture, a quiet revelation unfolding through ordinary movements. I sat at the table, pen in hand, the notebook open, and recorded the subtle changes I noted, reinforcing my awareness, keeping track of patterns, and preparing for the next phase without any outward display of impatience or reaction. The house, though quiet, seemed alive with the unspoken dialogue of intent and attention, every sound, every shift in light, every movement observed and processed with deliberate care. I sipped the tea slowly, feeling its warmth spread through my hands and chest, and I allowed the calm to settle over me, a measured readiness taking shape, knowing that the knowledge accumulated through observation provided a quiet, unwavering strength. In this space of deliberate attentiveness, I realized that influence and control did not require loud actions or dramatic gestures, only the careful accumulation of insight, the patient noting of details, and the readiness to act when the proper moment arrived. I set the pen down, closed the notebook gently, and allowed a slow, controlled breath, the room still and attentive around me, each moment reinforcing the quiet authority that comes from careful observation, steady patience, and deliberate preparation for what was to unfold next. Evening approached, and the golden light filtering through the blinds stretched across the living room floor, painting long patterns that shifted slowly as the sun descended. I moved with careful deliberation, picking up the small stack of letters I had set aside earlier, flipping through them, noting the postmarks, the subtle differences in handwriting, the nuances that could hint at intent or oversight. Ethan and Olivia passed nearby, their conversation muted, each phrase weighed with careful tone, and I registered every hesitation, every slight lift of an eyebrow, every fleeting glance, committing it all to memory without a single word of reaction. I brewed a fresh cup of tea, enjoying the ritual of pouring hot water over the leaves, the steam rising slowly, filling the kitchen with its soft, comforting aroma, and I carried the cup to the window, setting it on the sill to catch the last rays of sunlight. From this vantage point, I could see the entire living area, every angle and surface visible, and I watched as Olivia adjusted a throw pillow and Ethan smoothed a magazine on the coffee table, subtle acts that spoke more than words, a display of control and precision that now existed under my careful observation. I settled in. My chair, notebook open, pen ready, documenting each small motion, each fleeting expression, and each nuance in tone, not with judgment, but as a meticulous record of what I observed. The light continued to change, shadows lengthening and softening, emphasizing the contours of the furniture, the lines of the floorboards, the edges of the objects around me, each detail a marker in the environment that I noted with deliberate attention. I reflected on the patience I had cultivated over decades, the ability to notice and retain the smallest details, to understand context without the need for confrontation, and to allow the awareness of every action to guide decisions before any visible response. The cup of tea cooled slightly, but I remained calm, deliberate, and focused, the rhythm of my observation unbroken, as the house itself seemed to respond to the quiet attention it received. Olivia and Ethan moved with the assumption that their gestures were unnoticed, but each was catalogued, the patterns recorded, and the subtle tension between actions and observation growing without the need for outward acknowledgement. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, inhaling the gentle aroma of the tea, feeling the warmth spread, grounding me, and I let the knowledge of all that had passed and all that was unfolding settle into a quiet confidence. Every shift in light, every micro-expression, every sound became a part of a precise map in my mind, and I knew that this map would guide the decisions that followed, ensuring that the careful balance of patience and observation remained intact, and that the subtle power inherent in awareness was fully acknowledged by those around me, even if they did not realize it. The evening deepened, and I remained at the intersection of stillness and insight, aware of everything, reacting to nothing hastily, ready to continue the quiet orchestration with careful, deliberate measures. The house was quiet, the evening settling into a soft, muted calm that seemed to stretch each moment longer than it actually was, and I moved through the rooms with deliberate attention, noting the slight shifts in furniture shadows, the subtle reflections on the polished surfaces, and the way the remaining light caught on the edges of objects. I took the envelope from the countertop, turning it slowly in my hands, observing every crease and fold, aware that even the smallest detail could convey intention or oversight. Ethan and Olivia lingered in the adjacent room, speaking in measured tones, but I heard the subtle hesitation in their inflections, the brief pauses that betrayed uncertainty, all catalogued in my mind without the need for outward comment. I poured myself a fresh cup of tea, the warmth and aroma grounding me, and I carried it to the living room, placing it carefully on the table beside the notebook where I had been recording observations throughout the day. I settled into my chair, allowing the tea to steep into my awareness, and reviewed my notes, considering each small gesture, each fleeting glance, and each unspoken expression, understanding now that patience and careful observation had provided clarity that impulsive reactions could never achieve. The sunlight had nearly faded, leaving a soft glow on the walls, and I allowed myself to reflect on the quiet patterns of behavior I had witnessed. Olivia's meticulous alignment of magazines, Ethan's fleeting eye contact, the almost imperceptible tension in their shoulders, as if they sensed scrutiny without knowing its full extent. I adjusted the position of the notebook, pen poised, ready to record any new development, each movement deliberate, measured, and purposeful, demonstrating awareness and control without the need for overt expression. The faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds from the street outside punctuated the stillness, and I allowed these ordinary sounds to anchor my focus, each note reinforcing the rhythm of deliberate observation. I traced the contours of the furniture with my gaze, noting how light fell differently across the floor and surfaces as the sun set, and I felt the quiet satisfaction of being fully present, fully aware, and fully prepared for the unfolding sequence of events. Every subtle movement of Olivia and Ethan was noted, every micro-expression catalogued, creating a mental map that guided my attention and decisions. I sipped the tea slowly, feeling the warmth spread through my hands and chest, and allowed the calm to settle, a steady, measured readiness that did not need acknowledgement, yet conveyed quiet authority. In that stillness, I understood that influence was exercised not through confrontation, but through keen awareness, patience, and the careful orchestration of small, deliberate actions, and I allowed myself to settle into the rhythm of observation, fully present in the quiet intensity of the evening, knowing that every detail had been seen, every pattern recognized, and that the subtle power of awareness would shape what came next without need for noise or haste. Night had fully settled, the house bathed in the soft glow of lamplight, casting gentle shadows across the walls and furniture, and I moved slowly through the familiar spaces, noting the subtle details that marked the rhythm of the evening. The teacup from earlier sat cooling on the table, its warmth having eased my focus into a calm, steady attentiveness, and I allowed myself a quiet pause to reflect on the observations of the day, reviewing each subtle gesture, each fleeting glance, and each carefully measured word from Olivia and Ethan. I walked to the kitchen counter and rearranged the items there, aligning the utensils, stacking the plates precisely, each movement deliberate, a demonstration of the quiet authority I had cultivated over decades of attentiveness. I glanced toward the living room where Olivia adjusted a cushion, her fingers lingering slightly longer than necessary, and Ethan moved to straighten a magazine, both unaware that every motion was catalogued, each detail reinforcing the larger picture I was building in my mind. I opened my notebook and made precise entries, recording the time, movement, and tone, observing the interactions not with judgment, but with methodical clarity, understanding that patience and awareness were the strongest tools I possessed. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant sounds of traffic, and the gentle creak of the floorboards under my feet became part of the rhythm of observation, each sound offering insight into the subtleties of behavior and intention. I sipped my tea slowly, feeling the warmth settle into my hands and chest, a grounding presence that allowed me to maintain steady focus. I considered the patterns that had emerged over the day, the repeated hesitations, the careful positioning of objects, the small but telling inflections in tone, all pointing toward the awareness and intentions behind each action. I walked back toward the living room, placing the notebook on the table and straightening a photograph on the mantel, noting how the light from the lamp illuminated its frame, casting a soft shadow that highlighted every line and corner. The house felt alive in a quiet, deliberate way, each space a witness to the attentiveness I applied to understanding and preparing for what was to come. I allowed a slow, measured breath, feeling the steadiness in my chest and the clarity in my mind, recognizing that control and presence were maintained not through loud declarations, but through observation, patience, and carefully considered actions. The evening stretched on, and I remained centered, absorbing the subtle shifts in atmosphere, understanding the impact of every gesture, every glance, and every word, knowing that the foundation I had built with careful observation provided a position of quiet authority. I moved to the window and looked outside, the night deep and calm, and I felt the strength that comes from patience, the power in quiet awareness, and the certainty that the next steps I took would be deliberate, measured, and guided by the knowledge accumulated throughout the day, ensuring that every detail had been seen, every nuance understood, and every action ready to be taken with precision and calm.